Latina.
Latino.
Mexicana.
Hispano.
Dominicana.
Colombiano.
Cubana.
Hondureño.
Boricua.
Peruano.
Tica.
Venezolano.
Chicanos.
Los chilenos.
Españoles.
LatinX.
LatinX.
Sí, LatinX, claro. And if we left you out, and we did not mean to leave anybody out, we are so sorry. But give your country a shout out at our Twitter feed at LatinX POV on Twitter. So please give us a shout out, represent your country. We love all Latin American countries, all Spanish speaking countries. Gina, I have a quick question for you though. Do you have a preference with any of these labels and terms that we just talked about?
Sure. I love to be a tica. That's my brand.
Okay.
Costarricense, but you know when it comes down to the small label is tica.
Okay, so
Until
tica. So Gina is a tica till she dies.
How about you?
You know, it's interesting. For me, for many years, it was Hispano. You know, being born here in the U.S., growing up in Miami. In Miami, we use the term Hispanic a lot, Hispanic American. And then as I've gotten older and moved to different places, people use the term Latino. So I remember one time I was talking to my uncle. We were in New Jersey visiting. And I was like, yeah, la comunidad latina, la comunidad hispana. He was like, yo no soy hispano, yo soy latino. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't see a big difference in it. But that got me, that was the first time that I started thinking, wow, people are really passionate about the labels that others may put on them or that they put on themselves.
Absolutely. When it was 1995 when I first came here, and I remember vividly when somebody said Latina, and I'm like, wait, am I? Because in my country, of course, I was only referred as Gina because, yeah, you're in your country. You don't have to say you're tica.
True.
But here, you had to identify yourself. It's almost like, what is your ID?
Yeah. So it's funny how if you speak a different language or you're from a different culture, you're put in this box. And, you know, we can jump into that on another time and another frame. But, you know, one of these things about these labels and these terms is how people over the years, there's been kind of a little dispute over what term to use, Hispanic, Latino. Now it's Latinx, where people want to be identified in different ways. So hopefully throughout this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation about how the different labels...
And how we're going to go and talk about it, not just only for us, but also how people refer to us.
Yes.
So they're asking questions too. Is it Latino, Hispanic? And I'm confused because people are using Latinx too.
Yep. Let's pick up this conversation after a short break.
LatinX Point of View is brought to you by Civic Canvas, a bilingual boutique firm designing strategies for social change. To learn more at civiccanvas.com.
So going back on this labels thing, it's American thing, isn't it?
Kind of, sort of, yeah. I mean, from some of the homework that I was able to do, the term Hispanic actually came about from the Hispanos of New Mexico.
Huh.
So that was interesting to me because I thought it was something associated with the Caribbean or Hispaniola or something like that. But no, it actually comes from New Mexico and a group that was called Hispanos of New Mexico.
Huh. In my version, it was Hispanoamericano. Because Iberoamerica, Hispanoamerica, Latinoamerica, and there was a distinction that when you include Spain and when you include Brazil. Because if it's Iberoamerica, I think it includes Brazil and Portugal.
That's interesting. From the research that I was able to find, that's what makes the difference in the term Latino. So in the term Latino, that incorporates Latin American countries, which also incorporates Brazil and Portuguese from the Latin root.
Yeah,
you know, so.
But Latin root is actually true to French, it's true to Italian, and it's true to Portuguese.
Sure.
So if we had to say Latin, then you have to be inclusive of all the other languages as well.
That is true.
But when we are in America, you're either
Hispanic
or Latina.
Yep.
Or lately.
Or lately Latinx.
Yes, Latinx. And so it was there was a dispute about Latinx.
Yes.
But we can talk about that in a little bit.
And we will jump into that. But one of the things about the origin of the term Hispanic and where it got popularized was the 1970 census. So in the 1970s, the U.S. government was looking for a way to say, okay, we want to put all these folks in a group. And what had happened was, leading up to the 1970 census, you started getting people putting other. Because especially those that were of Latin American origin or had immigrated to the United States, when they did the census, they would mark other. They didn't say white, black, Asian, anything else, they would mark other. So in the 1960s, I believe, they saw an uptick in other as a category in the U.S. And other is supposed to be like that special category for like less than 1% of people on the census. So when you start getting into like 10, 15%, and it's other, you really want to identify it. So by the 1970s, they wanted to have an identifying feature, and that's where they came up with the term Hispanic to add to that census.
That's pretty cool. I knew that the census had to do something with Hispanic and how it just kind of made people have to reconsider what their identity was because it was imposed. It was not by a democratic process that, well, Latinos levanten la mano or Hispanic.
Oh, no, we got no input at all.
No. All of a sudden it was there.
Sure, it's like, we're going to give you this label and you're going to love it.
Which I'm okay. I mean, I like Hispanic. I do identify with both.
Sure.
In my journey, I have seen people who will come and ask me, how would you like to be identified? As a Latino or Hispanic? Are they both okay? How do I address the community? What is your take?
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that because it's very insightful of that person that's come to you and asked you that, because most people don't ask. Mm-hmm. So for many years, as I said, growing up in South Florida, we use the term Hispanic a lot. And moving around and coming into other communities who use Latino, I've now learned to blend when I say Hispanic Latino. Mm-hmm. So anytime I'm talking about our community and stuff like that, I say the Hispano Latino community or Hispanic Latino community. So that's the way that I use reference to it. Nowadays, more people are using the lexicon of Latinx, but I don't like to use that term too much, especially with older generations, because they look at me weird and they're like, what? ¿Qué? Esa ni una palabra de español. You know, so I'll get a little pushback on that, but they'll still understand the Hispanic Latino. And we got to remember, these terms didn't just get founded overnight. It took years for them to be incorporated into the fabric of our everyday lives. One of the things about that I found interesting was that as the U.S. government started branding everybody Hispanic, on the west coast of the U.S., people were like, nah, man, I identify as Latino. So it gave it that strong, like, yeah, this is something else, that pride of how I identify from my Latin American country. So then that's where that term started to kind of popularize itself up after the government tried to pigeonhole everybody into as Hispanic.
Because Hispanic, even when I first read Hispanic and then in the census or any type of actually form, you will find that they actually ask you race later too. So the Hispanic thing was like, okay, what am I? But the Latino piece, I think that it was more identifying culture. Like you're Latino if you like the salsa, if you have an abuela and a tia and a primo and a prima, and if you speak Spanish or someone in your family speaks native Spanish or fluent Spanish, and that's how the Latino became more of a brand of culture, and in my opinion, and Hispanic became more of a government kind of given name. But when we're talking about the pride of Latinos comes from the whole word, not Hispanic, it's Latino. I hear it more in this area, of course, in the East Coast.
And you know, the funny part is, to me, and I think you hit it right on the head when you identified as a tica. Because you said, I'm a tica, that's all I've ever known. And you know, the Pew Institute a couple of years ago, they did some research on this, and they found that a majority, 51%, identified mostly with their countries of families' origin. So, si tú eres mexicano, no, yo soy mexicano. You know, si eres tica, eres tica. Si eres colombiano, soy colombiano. And that's how people identify first. And then when you get pushed, you're like, well, all right, well, now I want to put you into this box, Hispanic or Latino. Which one do you want? And then that's when people kind of make the decision. But still, only 24% of people prefer to have that label of Hispanic or Latino. The majority of people prefer their home country.
Oh, and you know what? I actually have a theory of why people use their name country.
Okay.
Because of soccer.
Oh, that's true. Oh, man.
You can't confuse it.
Listen, I got a couple of a couple Colombian soccer jerseys in my closet. Y yo represento cuando juegan los cafeteros.
And, you know, I do believe that there is a little bit of soccer embedded in there and the pride of each country to have that soccer team and pulling for them because when you look at the CONCACAF and all that, that shapes culture.
Yes, it does.
And when you're here, you really have to pick a country.
Definitely.
And then of course, you will go to your closest reference, either your parents, your significant other, or whoever, you know, just Go for it.
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes people have told me, well, if the U.S. is playing Colombia, who are you rooting for? And it's funny because I was born here. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm an American, but I still will rep my Colombian jersey. And that's my family's heritage. Mm-hmm. So it's that pride that I take in that. So then I ask myself, well, then do you see yourself as a Hispanic American or a Latino American, or do you see yourself as an American?
Ooh,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
So that sense of my country's pride and my family pride is always there with me.
You know, when you say American, I think that for a lot of, there was another study that was talking about Latinos and the incoming generation of Latinos, whether they're catching on that Latino name, the pride of it. And unfortunately, it was actually saying that they're not celebrating their heritage. They're not celebrating their identity, and it's blending. And most of them they denominate themselves as American.
That's interesting.
It's very interesting. And I do have a theory about that as well. But actually, it's not a theory, it's a fact. Not a fact, but an informed fact.
Okay.
So there is an anthropologist who mentions that when you go through these cycles in your life, when you're in your 20s, you're more American if you're born here. But as you get older, in your 30s, and you start creating your life, and you have children, you go back to your roots. And that's when you start pulling again your identity, your Latino identity. Like, it's like from the 15 years old to 30, your mom is not your best friend until you get married again, and then you have children, then your mom is your best friend again. And that comes with, of course, that cultural richness. And so you start kind of revisiting your roots.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that, and I wonder where those statistics kind of came from, or who they surveyed, because I might see that in someone who came to this country from a Latin American country, and they tried to assimilate so much that they maybe, I don't want to say they neglected their culture, because I don't ever want to put that on someone. Everybody, you know, you love your culture and you take your stuff in at your own pace. But I have heard of people who assimilate so hard, and then later on in life, they're trying to find that identity again, or that home base of mi patria, my home country. But they don't. But that only comes after years of self-reflect. Because to be honest with you, ever since I've been a kid, growing up here in the U.S., ever since I've been a kid, we've rooted for Colombia. Why? Because my dad rooted for Colombia in soccer. You know what I mean? So as a child, you pick up on the things that your parents also pick up on. I remember my dad taking me to one of my first soccer matches in the Orange Bowl. It was Colombia versus the U.S. like in 1990 something. I'm not going to date myself. And I remember rooting for Colombia. And I was like, Colombia, Colombia. And
we got you. We got you in the Colombia.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I properly represent.
Absolutely. And then when you have also geographic distinctions, because I can't speak these to be general for every person in the U.S., because I'm in the East Coast, and I'm in a place where a lot of first-generation Latinos are. Now, if you go up the East Coast and you end up in New York, you're going to find people saying, I'm not even Puerto Rican, I'm New Yorican.
Yeah.
And then there is a pride, a blend of cultures that is actually very distinctive to where they are. If you go also with Chicanos and you go to other places, for most people, like you coming from Miami, I'm assuming that there was a little bit of also names that were carried out, or not even, or are you Latino Miami, or what is it?
No, like I said, mostly it's the term Hispanic, but, you know, and people, they will reflect back to their country of origin. So, you know, Cubans, it was easy to say, oh, I'm Cuban, you know, even though your parents were Cuban. Or if you're from Puerto Rico, you're soy boricua, you know, stuff like that. And nobody really questioned it because there's so much of the culture there that you don't really get that backlash. When people say, oh, okay, cool. Now I know where you identify from. Where do you identify from?
Yeah, and you know what? It's actually something about this is who is asking.
Correct.
And so for that, we're going to come back after the break.
That segment of the LatinX Point of View podcast was brought to you by L5 Consultants, a company committed to helping bridge cultural differences. You can find them on Twitter at L5 Consultants or on the web at l5online.com.
So who's asking is a big component of it, because does it come from a sense of curiosity, or are they